All right, here we go. Unit 5, topics 7 and 8. Almost there on the reviewing. All right, spatial organization of agriculture. Kind of a broad way to put these topics we're getting into, really. Okay, here it goes. Commercial and family farms. All right. There are a lot more commercial farms and a lot less family farms. That's all this one really comes down to. I'm sure you probably understood that ahead of time. Raising chickens this way instead of raising chickens this way. All right. Um, Raising crops this way instead of raising crops this way. That, as a matter of fact, that's simple enough that pretty much that's the kind of question that you would see would be how has the commercialization of agriculture impacted family farms? Well, they're replacing them. They are. This is disappearing. This is becoming the norm. Commodity chains. Commodity chains can go outside of agriculture. We're doing it here in agriculture. And that's fine, but it can be applied outside of agriculture. It can be applied in any business. For example, this chart up here is showing the oil business. Commodity chains just come down to you control all the inputs as well as outputs in your distribution. So if you are a company who manufactures, let's say, since the raw materials oil, let's say they make Vaseline, petroleum jelly. All right, so the oil goes here to the refinery, to your company, into the trucks, to the stores, and somebody buys some Vaseline. The company, I guess Johnson and Johnson or somebody like that that owns Vaseline would own each of these things along the way. That would be them controlling the commodity chain. Doesn't have to be owned by one person. When the whole company owns it, the whole corporation, it's called vertical integration. Right? That should go back to some previous social studies classes for you. However, it doesn't have to be. The commodity chain could be every one of these being a separate entity, and you just understanding these are the people in the chain. They working together because it's all in their benefit to do that. That's why it often turns into a single thing here. This is right out of the AMSCO book down here. This is corn, the commodity chain. How does it work? Just go back, look at something in your house, and say, okay, I'm looking at a remote control. How the remote control come from? Well, there would be plastic. There'd be some raw material there, and then somebody, oil would be one, so on. You can get with anything. So if you get a question about a commodity chain, you could probably reason yourself out with it some if you did that. Many of you did. Matter of fact, I think only one. I think it was only first period ended up doing commodity chains directly. But when you were doing your industry project that was for Unit 6 that we're not doing, but here's one of those things that works out real good. How these things, tend to be in more than one unit. You should have used this process when you were deciding what your factory needed and where it needed to be located. All right. So again, to double solve that, that's the kind of question you're going to see. Something that might reach into not really 6 and 7 because we're not testing over those, but multi-unit question. They've guaranteed that's how that will work. Questions I saw when going through test banks would ask basically how this works in farming. And here's a great example from AMSCO. I worked with corn, but you could probably take that pretty much the same way and apply that to anything besides corn. Okay, it's a little different. The harvesting process might look a little different, but you're still going to planting, growing, harvesting, processing, marketing. And then you could, the transportation part of it being part of a between there. You could probably stretch it some more into that if you needed to. And the benefits of it when you are the vertical integrator and you are controlling this. If somebody along the process here was stubborn, then it can throw off the whole process. If everybody's working together, it doesn't. Why they wouldn't want to work together? would be greed. I could see somebody so much not wanting to say, well, we're going to charge more than we put into this before you guys can manufacture it, more so than somebody saying that they didn't want to pay as much because they wanted to make more. And that might be where it breaks down to somebody. People always do it. Look at these professional athletes and their contracts and stuff like that. Always happens quite a bit. All right, the next part on 5.7, topic 7, unit 5, is the impact of technology. Okay, there's really been a lot of this when we got into the agricultural revolution, especially the green revolution. So this is saying besides that stuff, this is its own separate, not talking about GMOs and things like that. So you got the increased economy of scales, right? Larger plants. It used to be before technology and the communications and the transportation and all the things that made it cheaper, you would see a lot of canneries, places that processed agricultural food and canned them or frozen, however they get into market, might be located real close to farms. Many more smaller ones located closer to farms, closer to markets, versus now you're more likely to see bigger ones that have a much further reach and are somewhat urban, if not purely urban, in their location versus rural. There's several of these you can look at too with the economy of scale. Another one I'm pointing out here though is equipment cost. Say you're one of these agricultural corporations that harvest all these absentee fields, and so you've got a fleet of tractors and a fleet of combines and a fleet of planters and all of this. They can go from field to field. You've bought that equipment. You might have had to buy a whole lot of them because you're a larger scale, but they can go from field to field. If you're a farmer and you're buying one, that's a lot of cost without it getting used as often. So you could always do better like that. Same thing with purchasing. You're going to be able to purchase in bigger lots and get better prices because you're a larger sized company versus trying to buy at the single price. In other words, if the farmer was buying his tractor and it was $100,000, and you were buying 100 of them because you were a corporation, you might get them for $80,000 a piece because you're buying 100 of them. So you're spending more. That's why they're willing to give you a better price because they can sell more. Just like going to Sam's Club or Costco. The other piece on there, the increased carrying capacity. So as more farmable land is being done, things like taking swampland back or pumping, what's the word I'm looking for, like delta land, reclaiming it for farm, produce more food, increasing the carrying capacity. That's the two things that are pointed out, particularly in the articulation, the course description. So there's others on both these that you can apply, okay? But these are the two: the increased economy of scale and the increased carrying capacity that were mentioned particularly. I had to look up examples of those. Those aren't in there. All right. I think you guys own this, but I've thought of other things before that didn't work out that way. Von Thun, here he is. Got his very own topic in the course description. And it's not been too long ago since we've done it, and you guys showed you had pretty good mastery of it. But let's look at it. When Von Thun back in 18 whatever came up with this idea, he was thinking of the transportation cost. But remember, these also have the bid rent theory from a couple topics ago. The land closer to the market, housing land, central business district land, is more expensive than these lands that are further out you go for various reasons. The cheaper land gets, so the more land you need, and as for using the bigger circles, you need to be the cheaper. I didn't put labor here, but same goes with that. There's fewer workers needed for this. Well, you're out in the boonies, out in the sticks. There's fewer workers available. So same thing goes with these. This is actually the distance decay part of all of these. Distance decay in transportation, in rent, and in the goods themselves. Remember, the market garden dairy is closest by the market or the urban center because of perishability. The forest, this is one of the things that in a modern, if you were to work it out, like this, the forests really aren't that close anymore because we don't use wood for firewood. When he was in 18 whatever, people needed wood for more than just building materials. So this is more likely to be moved out even further. All right, but in the classic way, it's still there due to the transportation costs. That's why they leave it there to help you kind of get your mind around that. Specialty farming doesn't always conform. Oranges. I think some of you wrote an FRQ on that. That was one of the FRQs that was out there for you to write. Orange growing and some different approaches about it that kind of buck some of these models. But just remember it like this. Now, something I mentioned to you guys when we were looking at this before is we're talking about 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes people say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rings because they count the middle. Sometimes they won't count the middle and say 4. Sometimes they'll break up these into 2 different things. Sometimes they'll break this first ring, the farming and market. Actually, that's the thing you see most often is breaking this ring into 2 separate rings. And they can go either way. But if you ever read and it's asked for more and it has anything that's more than 5, you could paste that out there. Your common sense can fill that in. I don't think you'll see Von Thuan model on this year's exam since it's just 2 FRQs and this is pretty specific, but you don't know. When you could take things like distance decay, which goes from cross disciplines, you could throw in some other maybe cultural things in that go with it. Yeah, you never say never on what's on there. Again, if you're not using the multiple choice questions that are out there on Albert and the College Board, you're really limiting yourself to what possible questions can be asked because they're going to be asking you questions just like those, but you're going to be writing them out instead of multiple picking the answer. So that appears to be from what I see looking at who's engaging those things. The things will hurt most of you because most of you are not doing that. All right, so almost every question about a Von Thuan model was a multiple choice question. It was an application question. Why is that here and not there, and blah blah blah, and things like that. And the factors why. Why would this be here instead of there? So that is Unit 5, Topics 7 and 8.